What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today I wanted to try out one of the Pokemon that I hate the most in the Go Battle League, which is Wigglytuff. This Pokemon obviously is very polarizing in its matchups, but it's undeniably very good at shutting down a lot of the very strong Pokemon, like Shadow Annihilate, Shadow Feraligatr, Shadow Drapion even isn't that good into this pick, just with the amount of fast move pressure we have. So I wanted to give it a go and see just how strong it could be. Without further ado, let's get into the battles and see what Wigglytuff can do. Alright, let's get right on into it. Wigglytuff in the lead up against a Shadow Kanto Marowak. This is a very neutral matchup here. We have to keep in mind, though, that Charm does do more damage than Mud Slap. So despite getting outpaced to these charge moves here quite heavily, we actually are going to be able to just spam out our fast moves, charm them down in the 2-shield matchup, and potentially get switch advantage, which for our Shadow Marowak and our Drapion on the backline could be huge. Our opponent actually swaps out, though, after drawing a shield into their Dugong, a Pokemon which we don't have a hard answer to, but we can use our Wigglytuff to once again chip down this Pokemon and make it so once this is gone, hopefully our Shadow Marowak should have play in the back. This is going to be an Icy Wind. We should be able to survive it here. Wigglytuff is not the squishiest Pokemon out there, and we can reach yet another Swift. At this point, our opponent has a big decision to make. Do they shield this up, or will they just let this go? Swift comes to our opponent, does opt to shield it up here. I go for one extra charm, and I'm going to come with our Shadow Drapion and try to farm them all the way down. This is going to be an interesting thing to try to call right now. It could be a Drill Run, it could be an Icy Wind. I'm going to no-shield. It is fortunately for us just an Icy Wind, and now we might have to throw an Aqua Tail to knock out thanks to that debuff, but because we are a Shadow Drapion, we have so much energy. If that Marowak comes back in, we can Aqua Tail them. If we see the final Pokemon, that's also very good for us to see. Aqua Tail comes through, knocks out the Dugong, and our opponent reveals their Marowak once again. We are debuffed, but they're at half HP. Is this Aqua Tail enough to knock out? Let's see. Aqua Tail, it actually is going to draw the shield. Our opponent is staying in. When we bring in our own Marowak, like he's going to throw a Bone Club against us, which is going to draw a shield. At this point, I want to see a Shadow Drapion in the backline. That's a very common team. If that is the case, we win on the spot. Our opponent, they top left. It must have been Poison type or something weak to Marowak. GG's to them. Next matchup here, a Morpeko in the lead. One of the best possible leads you can see, especially because Shadow Marowak in the back is also fantastic against this, which is great to see because we're going to use our Wigglytuff instead against this Drifblim. Drifblim is by no means an answer to Wigglytuff. We have the ability to tank these Icy Winds and debuff them with our own Icy Wind. In comes their debuff, but we can outpace them before their second move is going to be thrown. Icy Wind should draw a shield or get a KO against Drifblim before it gets a second charge move off. Icy Wind being thrown, our opponent actually opts to shield it up, which in my opinion is a massive mistake because I don't even have to respect this move. I have debuffed them. Icy Wind is not going to knock us out, so we're going to get switch and shield advantage because of how crazy Wigglytuff is. Not only that, but I think we will also get a Swift off into whatever is going to come in here, unless they have a ton of fast pressure. No, it's just some Morpeko actually. So we have the Swift ready to go. Do they shield this up, or is Morpeko going to take a lot of chip damage here? Swift comes through, almost at half HP. Another Charm lands. They're at about 40% of their health, and now Marowak's going to slap them down. We see a Superior in the backline. Shadow Drapion with switch and shield advantage should be able to close out this backline, and our opponent top lefts. GG's to them. Next matchup, we're going to see a Shadow Drapion in the lead. Honestly, not the best matchup out there, but Wigglytuff, you can see with these charms are adding up quite a bit. I know a very good Wigglytuff can survive 2 Aqua Tails in the Zero Shield matchup, but my Wigglytuff that I have here isn't exactly the best, so you can see we would get 2-shot there. I'm going to do that just chip damage with our Charm, swap into our Shadow Drapion, and Aqua Tail at this point is going to start threatening their HP, whereas I'm not quite in range where I would get knocked out quite yet. In comes their own Azumarill, though, a very smart play. A lot of the time you do see Azu and Shadow Drapion on the same team. They like to sponge our own Shadow Drapion's energy on their Azumarill and use their damage against their Drapion with our Drapion. And because of this, our energy is kind of going to go nowhere here, but we did bait out a Azumarill, which our Pokemon in the backline, our Shadow Marowak, would not want to see. Aqua Tail coming through. We did get a debuff actually here with that Crunch, so our opponent is going to be pretty low. At this point, I think 2 Charms should be enough to knock out. They are only at 8 bubbles, so they're not going to reach an Ice Beam here and an Ice Beam against our Wigglytuff. Ice Beam will knock us out, but 2 Charms is more than enough to knock out that Azumarill. And what is going to come in here? I guess the Shadow Drapion is going to come back in, but Swift is going to be reached. Our opponent is going to have to shield this up if they want to get their energy off, which they are going to do. But now Marowak can come in, go for Mud Slaps, and unfortunately bait out the Drifblim in the backline. Not exactly what we wanted to see here. Mud Slap is going to be resisted. They have Icy Wind once again to debuff our attack stat, but Rock Slide is super effective. We still have a bit of Wigglytuff around as well. There is a sliver of a chance we can win this game, but I'm not quite sure what that will be. In comes an Icy Wind. I have to start using a shield at some point in this game. Our opponent is going to debuff our attack stat, so Rock Slide going to do quite a bit less damage than I would want it to do, but it should still put them pretty low on HP, and if I can get a couple of Charms off, maybe we can put them into range where Bone Club could knock them out here. I can swap out now, go for a Charm, get at least a bit of strip damage here. Our opponent does throw a charge move, so I'm going to shield this up. I know Icy Wind at this point would knock us out, but I know I can charm this down, maybe even charm down the Shadow Drapion. Our opponent not going to risk the fact that we could have charmed them down there. They're going to have to throw energy, and now if I can slap this down and potentially Bone Club the Drifblim, I might have a shot at winning this game. We have the Bone Club loaded. Is it enough to knock out the Drifblim? It's at the red HP. It's a resisted move, though, against a non-Shadow Drifblim. Bone Club comes through. It's barely enough to knock out Shadow Marowak, somehow closing out that endgame. Alright, next matchup, a Superior in the lead, a very neutral lead matchup, but we love to avoid this with our Shadow Marowak. So just going to stay in, go for Icy Winds and Charms, and try to win this matchup the longer it goes on. Our opponent is going to throw a charge move. It could be a bait with an Aerial Ace. If they do bait us here, they can actually reach an Ace plus a Frenzy Plant before I even reach a single Icy Wind, but our opponent actually going to swap out instantly here into their Licky Licky. The thing is, I do know that if they have a Grass type in the lead and they save swap a Licky Licky, 99% of the time, it seems that means they have Solar Beam. I'm already down shields though, and I don't really need Switch against Superior, so I'm fine if it is Solar Beam to just let this go and try our best to use our Shadow Drapion and Wigglytuff to close out this endgame. It is a Solar Beam. We get one shot there with our Marowak and bring in our Shadow Drapion. We get denied, unfortunately, thanks to that one-turn lag. That might end up costing us a bit here. Now we can't get as much energy as I'd like to. I'm going to overfarm, take a Body Slam here in just a second. Unfortunately, that one deny, making it so we have to take this move. Our opponent is going to Body Slam us here, though, but we have enough HP that maybe we can go for a full Poison Sting down, which we are able to get. We can crunch whatever's going to come in here. Our opponent does bring in the Dunsparce. Of course, they don't end up getting a one-turn lag of their own, so a rollout is going to get sneaked through here. Crunch is going to debuff their defense stat, and another crunch is going to come through. At this point, there is a lot of HP and a lot of energy across the board, though, on our opponent's side, and Wigglytuff, even though it does have energy, is a very slow-charging Pokemon. I don't know if I can win this game just with our charge move pressure here. Icy Wind coming through. It does a decent chunk of damage, but in comes a charge move. Aerial Ace, Frenzy Plant, no matter what it's going to be here, it would do a lot of damage. It is an Aerial Ace bait, which is an interesting play. They could have reached a Frenzy if they wanted to, but either way, they do draw the shield, and they are going to be able to double drill on us here with this Dunsparce. Charm's not going to be anywhere near enough damage to knock out this Dunsparce. They have a shield as well, and that means that this Dunsparce is going to be able to close out the backline. Alright, next matchup, a Wigglytuff up against a non-Shadow Jumpluff, that is. This Pokemon is very bulky, but we have Icy Wind, which is super effective against it, but they can always bait us. They can always go for very spammy charge moves, and this matchup isn't as comfortable as you might expect it to be. In comes a charge move. Could be an Aerial Ace, could be an Energy Ball. I'm going to shield it up. It is an Aerial Ace bait, good bait by them, which means now they can go for an Energy Ball before I even get our debuff off. This is not looking amazing for us right now, but our opponent is going to throw this move, and now we will have an opportunity to throw a charge attack of our own. Icy Wind coming through. Does our opponent respect this move, or are they just going to let this go? They do shield it up here. Obviously, that would one-shot them if they did let that go, and now at this point, they are going to be forced to throw another Energy Ball thanks to that debuff before I can knock them out with a Swift, which is likely what we're going to see here. Energy Ball does knock us out, and Shadow Drapion is going to go for a nasty farm down. I guess not. They were actually going to swap out to a Dunsparce here, which our Shadow Drapion can go for a crunch against, and then I'm going to try to catch a Drill Run on our Shadow Marowak and slap them all the way down. At this point, that Jumpluff does have a bit of energy, but I know if I get a lot of energy on Marowak, I can go for Rock Slides against that Jumpluff, and potentially our Shadow Drapion up energy would have play into the backline. I know a lot of the times we see Annihilate as a third Pokemon with Dunsparce and Jumpluff. If that is the case here, I should be in a good spot as long as I keep energy lead on both of my remaining Pokemon here. In comes that second Drill Run. We can survive it pretty easily, go for the Mud Slap down, have a ton of energy in reserves for this Jumpluff. They do bring it back in, obviously. I have to throw this move instantly, or it's an Aerial Ace would knock us out. Rock Slide is going to end up landing our opponent trying to call a Bone Club bait, potentially, but I get a Bone Club against this Annihilate before they can counter us down. At this point, all I need to do is reach 2 crunches with our Shadow Drapion before they're going to be able to counter us all the way down, and thanks to all the energy we had with that catch that we made earlier, Crunch is already loaded before even a single Rage Assist will be thrown. Our opponent, realizing they're going to get heavily outpaced, they no-shielded. GG's to our opponent in that game. Next matchup, a very neutral lead matchup, but we have to keep in mind our Shadow Marowak does not want to see this Pokemon. Even Shadow Drapion's not exactly great here with the resisted charge moves, so very happy to just kind of soft lose this matchup and make it so this Azumarill is nowhere near as big of a threat in the backline as they would want it to be. Swift ends up coming through on a CMP actually, and because I do so much damage here, I'm kind of considering swapping out to Shadow Drapion. This is a much more manageable health range if I happen to line up my Shadow Marowak into it later on, and our opponent comes in with an Annihilate to counteract our Shadow Drapion. Not the best answer to a Shadow Drapion, but it is still going to be able to put in a lot of work in the 2-shield matchup. Maybe they're going to ramp up their attack stat here, and they actually let us get to an Aqua Tail before they end up throwing a charge move. I'm going to try to get a shield here, maybe I can get a second one, and see if our Shadow Marowak can close out this endgame. Our opponent actually getting a little bit too greedy here. They let us get to a second Aqua Tail. This is fantastic to see. This move should come close to knocking them out. It actually definitely would knock them out from that range, but they double shield, which means now Wigglytuff can come in, charm down, and hopefully win this game. It seems like at this point they probably have close combat here with the way they played this out. Oh, it's just Ice Punch. That is terrible to see because now we have wasted a shield here. I probably should have just invested in a 2-shield Marowak sweep, but now Ice Punch will lower us down pretty low into the red health, and they bring in a Galarian Corsola. I'm going to throw my Mud Sap in my Bone Club immediately when I get it to not desync the Switch Plus, but rather to make it so I am not going to be down that Mud Sap due to the one-turn swap-in, and our opponent is going to throw instantly as well to draw our shield. I know Azumarill, though, is 3 bubbles away from an attack. I don't think, though, that 3 Mud Saps plus a Bone Club is enough to knock out. No, honestly, Bone Club, it does about 22%. They're at about 25% HP. I needed that next Mud Slap to be able to put them into Bone Club range. Our opponent able to barely win this game here. GG's to them, very close matchup. I should have just let Wigglytuff go and invested in a 2-shield Marowak sweep, but you know, you live and you learn. Don't always shield the Wigglytuff, right? Although in this next game here, a fantastic lead matchup for Wigglytuff. And I guess our opponent having the non-shadows here, non-shadow Gator, non-shadow Drapion as well. The thing is, I know even though they will get to 2 Aqua Tails with how slow I was on this swap before Bone Club is going to be reached, nothing really wants to take a ton of energy from Marowak. I can shield this up, go for a full Mud Slap down, and have a ton of energy, not only against that Feraligatr, but maybe if they bring in whatever their final Pokemon is, I can still throw Rock Slide or Bone Club against them. As long as it's not like a Chestnut, nothing is really going to drain this energy or want to take this energy from my Shadow Marowak. They're thinking for a second here, they actually bring in a Talonflame, which while this is a good Pokemon for a Shadow Drapion in normal situations, this is a little bit awkward. Rockslide will draw both shields here, but because they're going to get a huge energy lead, they could potentially sweep this endgame if I'm not careful. I know they have a Feraligatr in the lead matchup, right? So safe swapping my Shadow Drapion here is going to put us into a range where I can potentially go for Aqua Tail against this Pokemon, Crunch against the Feraligatr, and still win this game just with our Shadow Drapion here. I drain all of their energy from that Talonflame with our Drapion. I shield up the Fly, and now Crunch is going to come through against this Feraligatr. Obviously, it's the non-Shadow, so I can survive it just a little bit easier, but again, they're the non-Shadow, right? That means that they're going to do a lot less damage to us here, and as long as I'm going to be 1 Poison Sting away from an Aqua Tail, I can always reach it against that Talon when it comes back in here. Aqua Tail should be enough to finish off this Feraligatr. I am 1 Poison Sting away. That Incinerate will not be able to knock us out before I can reach it, and then we can probably fast move down with Wigglytuff and with Shadow Marowak. In comes the Aqua Tail. Our opponent is going to have to let this move go because they don't have any shields left over at this point. Wigglytuff, even though it will take a Brave Bird, should be at least tanky enough to survive just barely. Even if it's not, though, I can just Mud Sap down after this Brave Bird is going to land. We actually survive on like 1 HP here. Wigglytuff just barely able to hold on and take the win against a very tricky Core Breaker in the back. All right, a tricky Core Breaker in the back, but this game is going to be a very good lead for our Wigglytuff. Obviously, Shadow Dragonite, not a Pokemon that wants to see a Fairy type. And in the back line, going to see a Shadow Drapion. The thing is, this Pokemon is going to have Aqua Tail. It will do a lot of chip damage to us, but if I was quick enough on the swap here, I could actually go for a Bone Club. But I think I was a little bit slow on the swap, actually, so I'm going to go for a Shield and a Farm Down. Now, I can likely get Shields back from that Dragonite if they do bring it back in with Rock Slide. And our opponent is going to get our Shield, but we get that full Slap Down. And they actually bring in their final Pokemon here. It's going to be a Ferrothorn, a Pokemon which obviously is going to resist a lot of our damage with our Shadow Drapion, and potentially would be able to resist all of our Wigglytuff's passive pressure. I actually end up waiting a turn here. I wanted to make sure our opponent did get that Bullet Seed back. We ended up denying them a full Bullet Seed thanks to the 1-turn lag, but I mean, at this point in this game, it's not really going to matter. These Mud Saps honestly have done quite a bit of damage to this Ferrothorn, and I think as long as we can land a Crunch, draw that final shield, our Wigglytuff should just sweep this endgame here. Even if this is a Flash Cannon, we survive. Normally it's a Thunder on this Pokemon, but no, Flash Cannon is going to be thrown, and now just watch for a potential snipe down with these Dragon Mists. They don't end up swapping out, so I'm just going to throw the Crunch, try our best here to draw this shield, and force more energy from this Ferrothorn. Our opponent will throw a Power Whip right now, but I think at this point, all I have to do is charm down this Ferrothorn, Icy Wind the Dragonite, and that should be game over for our opponent here. Charm, despite being resisted, is one of the best fast moves in the game. It's doing so much damage to this Ferrothorn. Our opponent tries to swap out to Dragonite, but I have the Icy Wind ready to go. They have no energy on this Pokemon. Icy Wind going to one-shot the Flying and Dragon-type Pokemon. In comes the Ferrothorn, and 2 more Charms are enough to finish off this game. GG's to our opponent. Honestly, I feel a little bit dirty using a Charm user, but it is sometimes also very fun. Next matchup going to be a Shadow Quagsire Pokemon. Our backline doesn't really want to see Aqua Tail, obviously, would do a ton of damage to our Shadow Marowak, and these ground-type fast moves would do a lot of pressure against our Drapion, so very happy to whittle down this Pokemon before they end up bringing in something else in the backline. Aqua Tail going to come through. The second Aqua Tail will knock us out, so I want to throw the Swift before they have the opportunity to draw our first shield. I want to get a shield advantage against this Pokemon. They have an Aqua Tail ready to go right now. They actually overfarmed quite a bit of energy here, which means they can likely reach a charge move in just a second. I'm going to no-shield this. Instead, opt to shield up my Shadow Marowak and get a bit of an energy lead going into whatever our opponent's backline is going to be. Our opponent is throwing a charge move here, likely an Aqua Tail is going to be thrown, but I don't think they're going to reach another one. Even though Shadow Quagsire is spammy, it's not as spammy as it used to be back when Mudshot was 9 energy, and our opponent having a Pidgeot in the backline is actually a little bit scary here. Pidgeot obviously does resist these ground-type moves. Rock Slide is super effective, but it's non-stab. It's not the best move in the game. The Pidgeot could easily survive that, but our opponent actually still opts to shield it up here. We do outpace them, though, to another Rock Slide before they're able to knock us out with a Brave Bird or an Aerial Ace. This Rock Slide does a ton of damage, but our opponent is going to have a ton of energy here. I tried to catch a Feather Dance or an Aerial Ace on our Shadow Drapion, but now I have to shield this up. Our opponent is going to actually still go for the Feather Dance, so that's kind of a terrible move to shield up. And then they're going to bring in a Malamar. This endgame is going to get way more tricky than I'd like it to be. I can reach 2 crunches against this, but my attack is at -2. That is 50% less damage that I'm going to be doing with these crunches. I do get a defense drop here, which might be a little bit helpful, but because I am still at net -1 attack against this Pokemon, the next crunch is not enough to knock them out. Superpower is a very efficient move. It could knock us out here, but if I can swap out, I'm only 1 Poison Sting away here from a move. I can potentially use our 1 Poison Sting against that, what's it called, the Pidgeot in the backline to still reach an Aqua Tail. They're going to be forced to throw a charge move against our Marowak. They have no energy remaining. As long as I can come in here, do 1 Poison Sting, throw the Aqua Tail against this Pidgeot, we can actually still win this endgame by going for this charge move here with our Shadow Drapion. Aqua Tail does knock out the Pidgeot. We are able to barely win that one on 1 HP. GG's to our opponent. Very cool team. Next matchup, a Malamar in the lead. One of the best lead matchups we could possibly see. Our opponent, though, having a very tricky save swap for us here with a Dugong. We have seen this Pokemon, though, in the past. It's not the worst thing for a Wigglytuff to take out. And once this Pokemon is gone, hopefully our backline has a bit more play. Our whole team is very strong against Malamar, so I'm not as worried about it. And I'm actually going to go for a Shadow Drapion swap in now, knowing that if I land this Crunch after those Charms, I can either go for a full Poison Sting down if they opt to let it go, or I can potentially get a shield advantage here. Our opponent does actually opt to let it go, so at this point, just shielding this, farming all the way down, and spamming out charge moves against a Malamar seems like it could be a good play. Our opponent does end up going down to these Poison Stings here. We do get baited by that Icy Wind, which is a little bit unfortunate, but Malamar coming back in is not going to want to take these charge moves, and they will have to throw a charge move of their own to knock us out due to these sideways being resisted. We get another Crunch debuff here against this Malamar. I'm going to go for the Aqua Tail before a Superpower is even possible to be reached. Aqua Tail is going to draw a shield, actually, which is very good to see, and our opponent is going to be forced to throw a charge move right before my next Aqua Tail. They could go for a foul play here if they want to knock us out without debuffing themselves, but they are likely going to swap out instantly, so they go for the superpower anyway, and our opponent bringing in a Diggersby. Unfortunately, a one-turn lag, making it so our opponent gets 1 extra quick attack that they would not have got to otherwise. Icy Wind will debuff their attack stat, and now Shadow Marowak is going to try its best to close out this endgame. The trickiest thing here, though, is if they do get a Scorching Sands debuff, then my 2 Bone Clubs and Mud Slaps won't be enough to knock them out quite yet. Scorching Sands number 1 comes through. Luckily, no debuff on that first move, but if they debuff us on the second one, it could still be a little bit tricky here. Because they are debuffed themselves, though, they're not doing a lot of damage to us. We still have a shield left over as well. I think at this point, our Wigglytuff, as long as we save our shield for it, should be able to close out this backline. Our opponent is throwing yet another Scorching Sands here. It's going to do a lot of damage, but we are able to survive it. There is that debuff, so this Bone Club is not going to be quite enough to knock them out, but it should still do a substantial amount of damage to them. Maybe put them to a range where we can go for a fast move down later on. Our opponent does bring in this Malamar. They are able to barely get to a superpower, but at this point, as long as this Diggersby doesn't reach 2 Fire Punches in this endgame, we should be able to win. Wigglytuff is going to come in. 1-2 Charms is all it's going to take here to knock out this Diggersby before they're able to reach a charge move, and we're able to win that one. Alright, next up to be Shadow Drapion in the lead up against our Wigglytuff. We've seen this matchup is very neutral, but honestly, I don't like wasting my Wigglytuff against a Pokemon that could potentially be a little bit less bad for it in the backline. We know Shadow Gator is sometimes with Shadow Drapion. I'd rather have my Wigglytuff for that, so save the energy here and just come in with our own Shadow Drapion. Our opponent brings in their own Diggersby, a Pokemon which is able to consistently win this matchup, but Aqua Tails are still going to add up quite a bit, and our Marowak is going to hopefully find a good target in the backline. With that said, I know Shadow Drapion plus Azumarill is a very common duo. If that is the case, Marowak is not going to have a lot of play in the backline, and this might be kind of an RPS loss here, but we'll have to see what our opponent's running. Maybe they're running something a little bit spicier than Azumarill. We'll just have to wait and see. Scorching Sands is going to come through. Luckily, no debuff on our attack stat here. Going to go for a CMP on this next charge move. I know it could be a Scorching Sands. Our opponent, though, might go for a Fire Punch bait if they're getting a little bit cheeky here. Aqua Tail is going to draw that shield, and our opponent now going to do a charge move of their own. Fire Punch would not knock us out. Scorching Sands likely will. Yeah, down goes our Drapion, and now Marowak going to try its best here to go for a full Mud Slap down. Our opponent will reach a Fire Punch, but they will not reach a Scorching Sands, meaning that we can get a lot of energy, take just a little bit of damage, and hopefully use energy on Wigglytuff and on our Oh, yeah, I guess at this point it is the Azumarill in the backline. Not what we wanted to see. Maybe there's still a chance for us this game. I'm going to try to go for a Swift, chip down this Azumarill, and see what we can do. But Wigglytuff and Shadow Marowak are in a very tricky spot. Our opponent, though, brings in the Shadow Drapion. They do throw energy against us, which is good to see, but they have a lot of energy still left over. They can Aqua Tail us here. They have almost 100 energy on that Azumarill at this point. I'd have to throw energy against both to win the game. I just didn't have enough left in the tank. Next matchup. Okay, well, that's a huge core breaker, right? A Poison and Grass-type Pokemon. That's going to be very good into my Charm User and my Mud Slapper. With that said, though, they have a Dunsparce as a counter swap here into our Shadow Drapion. Not exactly the worst thing for us to see. I might be able to get a shield advantage here, which a shield advantage would help us out so much against that Venusaur. In comes an Aqua Tail now. I'm going to try to bait, try to get a shield here if I can, or if they end up letting this go, I can start winning in the longer shielding scenario matchups. Our opponent is going to throw a Charge Move. I'm going to no-shield this up, go for a farm down completely with our Wigglytuff, and try to use the shield advantage on our Marowak to win this endgame. They actually lag a turn on entry here, which means that our opponent is going to be able to not get charmed down here. They will get 2 charge moves off rather than just 1. Our Wigglytuff, rather than having all of this HP remaining, is going to take another about 40% of our HP here, which is absolutely tragic, but I know I can still go for a Swift against this Venusaur, potentially put them into a Mudslap farm down range, and maybe still our Shadow Kanto Marowak in the backline could sweep depending on what it's going to be. We bring it in now. We are taking super effective Vine Whip damage, but honestly, it's not doing that much to us. Whereas our Mud Slaps, they are going to knock it out. At this point, they are at back-to-back charge moves, but I just snuck a Mud Slap there. That should knock them out. They go for a Sludge Bomb. I guess at this point, our opponent, they have a more Morpeko in the backline. They realize this is a game over. GG's to them. All right, next game, Wigglytuff up against a Dragonite. Not a Shadow Dragonite, a Dragonite with a bow tie. Very cool stuff here. Our opponent bringing in a Bubble Jellicent, actually. Maybe I should have stayed in that matchup. Honestly, Bubble Jellicent is not the most comfortable matchup here for Drapion because these are neutral fast moves, but after landing 2 charms, I have put them very close to range where a Crunch could knock them out. I'm going to shield up the Surf, go for a Crunch, knowing that even if I go down shields here in this matchup, I can go for Crunches against that Dragonite. I should still be in a good spot. Our opponent, though, because of how slow Surf is to reach with Bubble, they don't even reach a second when we get a full Poison Sting down, and now we can reach a Crunch and maybe even an Aqua Tail, maybe even back-to-back Crunches against this Dragonite, and either knock them out or be able to draw a shield from this Pokemon. In comes the first Crunch. It doesn't quite knock them out here because they are in the non-shadow, but we have an Aqua Tail ready to go. In comes Aqua Tail. Our opponent is going to opt to let that go. In the backline, going to be a shiny Alolan Sandshrew. Honestly, I feel so bad for RPSing this trainer. They have a very cool team, and I'm using some of the most degenerate picks in the game. I can just Mudslap this down, shield up the Blizzard. I don't want to get one shot here. Our opponent, unfortunately, is going to get slapped all the way down with their poor little Sandshrew. All right, next matchup here, a Shadow Steelix. We're getting a little bit of a taste of our own medicine here. One of the worst Pokemon for us to see. I'm going to go for an Aqua Tail if I can before they swap out. And our opponent is staying in. They likely don't have a hard answer to our Shadow Drapion, but they are able to go for debuffs against us either with Breaking Swipe or with Psychic Fangs and potentially lower our attack or defense stat. Let's see what they're going to throw. In comes a Psychic Fangs. Good no-shield by us. It's going to do a lot less damage, but then they come in with a Mandible as a Pokemon, which obviously is going to be able to farm us all the way down. They can tank our charges also pretty easily here. Aqua Tail number 1 will be thrown. Our opponent is going to be able to reach an Aerialist right now, but I think after throwing all these charges, I might be able to swap out to Wigglytuff, maybe even charm this down. Maybe we have some play with this game with a decent switch clock. It's really going to come down to, though, what that final Pokemon is going to be, and if our Shadow Marowak has any play. I know sometimes there is going to be a Pokemon in the backline like a Corsola, maybe an Annihilate, but if that is the case, then maybe a 2-shield Marowak sweep could happen here. Our opponent is throwing yet another Aerialist. It will chip us down to a pretty low HP range, honestly, but if I can go for an Icy Wind against this Steelix, maybe start debuffing their attack stat, and potentially just building up energy with Marowak, we might have a chance to win this one. Icy Wind will come through, but our opponent is going to get a huge farm down here, which is actually super scary because they might have Earthquake, but even if they don't, they could still spam out debuffing moves against us, which could put us in a very tricky spot. Our opponent throwing a charge move. Is it an Earthquake? I'm going to no-shield it at this point. I just have to hope that it isn't. Psychic Fangs is going to be thrown. Our opponent throwing yet another charge move against us, and I'm thinking at this point, I kind of have to shield something, right? If this is not an Earthquake, it's still fine. I have to shield up some move this game, and our opponent, unfortunately, having a Wigglytuff in the backline. Not the worst Pokemon for Marowak to see, but at this point, we have been chipped down a little bit too much here, and they're going to be able to permanently debuff our attack stat before we land a Bone Club with an Icy Wind here in just a second, so they have us. Unfortunately, GG's to them. All right, next game, a Wiggles into a Primeape. Very good lead matchup. We actually have a lot of play against this Pokemon, especially if we are either up shield or up energy. Our opponent stays swapping in an Azumarill, so it's a very good thing that we have a lot of play into that Primeape because we don't have a hard answer here into the Azumarill. Swift is going to come through. Our opponent likely is going to let this go, knowing that Swift is not the most powerful move in the game, and they're building up a little bit more energy here. They go for a charge move against our Wigglytuff, and now I'm going to try our best to survive this swap into Shadow Drapion and use this energy lead to our advantage. I know they will reach a charge move before I can knock knock them out, but that is totally fine. All I need to do is shield this up and farm them all the way down. They don't reach a second charge move here, so I'm going to have basically 100 energy coming out of this matchup, and that should be enough to make it so Primeape, if it comes back in, is going to be in a world of hurt, and if it's not Primeape, if it's the final Pokemon, almost nothing, once Azumarill is out of the way, wants to take 100 energy from Drapion, especially not a Diggersby, who is weak to Aqua Tail here. In comes the first Aqua Tail, in comes the second Aqua Tail as well. Does our opponent want to shield this up, or are they just going to completely stack their Diggersby? Aqua Tail number 2 going to come through, our opponent is going to let it go. I have another Aqua Tail, but our opponent, they throw after 5, that's just a Fire Punch. I survived this, I can reach another 2 Aqua Tails here. Our opponent, I think at this point, is in a very tricky spot. I have back-to-back Aqua Tails, they do catch on their Primeape, but at this point, if they don't shield this, I can charm down. If they do shield, I'm very close to another charge move on our Wigglytuff. We can come in and either throw a Swift or charm them all the way down after this next Aqua Tail. Our opponent does opt to shield this up here, which is totally fine. These charms are doing a catastrophic amount of damage to this Primeape's HP. They will likely Rage Fist us here, but that is fine. We can go for another charm, go for a Swift, knock them out, and then our Shadow Marowak in the backline can close out against the remainder of the HP on that Diggersby. Swift does come through it, easily knocks out the Primeape, and now 2 more charms will chip this thing down even more. We have a bit of HP on Shadow Drapion as well if we needed it, but our opponent, all they needed to see was what our final Pokemon was. They end up top lefting. GG's to them. Next game here, a very tricky lead matchup. Ariados is a Pokemon that our backline and our lead kind of struggle against, but we have a lot of neutral play in the backline. We just don't have a hard answer for this. We save swap our Shadow Drapion, go for an Aqua Tail, and we are likely going to be hit by a lunge in just a second, lowering our attack stat and doing quite a bit of neutral damage to us. With that said, we have chipped down this Ariados into a range where we might be able to charm down later on. Our opponent goes for that lunge that we thought they would go for, and they bring in a Goodra of all things. Not exactly a Pokemon that a Drapion doesn't have play into. Crunch, even though it is debuffed, is still going to be able to do about half of their HP and put them into an easy charm down range. We also got the defense drop here. Honestly, it might be a bit of a bad thing because it's going to mean that we're going to get but they don't throw any energy against us? What the heck is going on here? I guess now we have an energy lead with Wigglytuff. That was a sudden ending here to the last game of the day. Our opponent realizing, I guess, that Wigglytuff must just sweep their team once we charm through the rest of that Goodra and the Ariados. I guess I'll take it. You know, Wigglytuff, it's a bit of a guilty pleasure, honestly. I've never really used a charm user, at least not competitively, but man, it's hard to argue with the successes this Pokemon can have. It's very good against a lot of annoying Pokemon, and just in general, it's going to be good not only this season, but in next season as well, with a lot of Dark types getting buffed, so I guess I need to start getting used to it. Alright, well, thank you so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed the battles and you want to see more content like this in the future, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. It helps out the channel a ton, and I would really appreciate it. Thank you again, though, for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.